Last time we talked, I think I told you what I wanted to do, and I think you were a little skeptical of what I was going to do. I couldn't be, more proud of what is going to go on here starting Thursday night.
Our princess that night, along with some of the other characters that I can't remember since I still haven't seen the movie, although it is my favorite movie. Thanks for having us, Chris. I appreciate it. But, could have had me on alone, but I guess you didn't want that.
Oh, I was waiting for that.
It really makes me feel great that the town's, just reacting even with more love for the Mustangs.
I think like anytime we had something, Dan always just wanted to hop on a podcast. And so for us, it seemed like a fitting tribute to Dan is to hop on. Some of us were privy to the times Dan would text us ahead of time and he would want us to talk about topics such as pie or cake and give us such debates on our thoughts on pie or cake. He just wanted to talk. And so this is fun for us to be able to get together and talk about Dan. And I think, this is absolutely what he would want for us. When I bought the team from him, he said, well, how are we going to announce it? And, he knew it. He wanted to get, someone to host this and for us to just be able to talk about it. So it's fun for us to be able to get here today and remember Dan. For me, my first impression of Dan, this is actually something that I go and I speak about to college classes is first time I called Dan, he tried to hang up on me within the first 5 seconds and tell me he didn't want anything. And so, cause I was actually trying to get a job with the Mustangs. And so first meeting was a quick rejection. Fortunately, we made it through that. But for me, then after that, seeing him in person, he was just a very, intimidating at times. He just had like an aura about him. I think we would all three of us who met him the first, and you would see Dan when you meet someone, he would just stick his hand out and say, "Hi, I'm Dan." And you rack your brain like, oh my gosh, what, some people will just be like a deer in the headlights. Maybe I know Dan, maybe I don't, but he was always and that was just his way of being nice and saying, "Hi, I'm Dan," and introducing himself. And so he just had a presence about himself. So what about you, Coach Johnson?
Oh, he definitely had a larger than life, persona. He didn't really have to say much to create a room. You know what I mean? Like he had instant respect when he walked into clubhouse, my office, the bus. I mean, pretty much anywhere. He commanded instant respect. And one of my earliest stories of him is when he hired me. We were down in Independence, Jason, a hockey game, right next to the original Big Biscuit. And he's like, "You got to go and eat there. You just have to. You got to go eat." I was like, "Okay, perfect." My dad was in town. My mom was in town. We took him over there to eat. And what we thought was going to be, 30, 35 minutes eating breakfast turned into about a 2.5 hour menu sampler of every meal that was on the menu. And I'm not talking like samples. I'm talking, it looked like I brought 40 people with me to eat. So it was full portions of everything. And it's the closest to being a celebrity that I've felt in a restaurant, with the way that the manager took care of things. And, looking down the road, looking back on it now in the 9 years that I was with the Mustangs, that's exactly how Dan treated everything. He wanted you to have the greatest experience, no matter the cost. And it is still some of the best food that I've ever had in my life, hands down.
I never got that treatment, so now I'm kind of upset. I might be off this. What the heck?
I think we got a donut once, didn't we? When we went down there, maybe.
Speak for yourself.
Well, you were there.
Well, Chris told me before the show that he was going to buy. So, Kai, anytime you want to head down to the original one,
that's right.
Chris was going to.
Actually,
that on,
speaking of that,
tab.
Yeah, Jim Bly owes me one for a Mizzou Arkansas game. And but Jim would always hit up Dan I think Jim was trying to get a free meal out of Dan to pay for my free meal that he owed me. So it was kind of like a hand me down free meal. I was just looking for free food.
Yeah. Well, we can hook you up at Northwest next time you go up there. we'll hook you up in the old calf and give you whatever tasty morsels they have there.
Well, speaking of tasty morsels at Northwest, we've also got Matt Tritton on here, and I know Matt kind of has an interesting experience because Matt was on the media side at the time. I'm sure meeting Dan.
What an introduction there, tasty morsels. I appreciate that, Kai. So I had come across Dan a couple times at some games, and I knew who he was. I introduced myself, but it was typically during Mustangs playoff runs. There were a lot of different things I was kind of trying to hit all at once during that time. But as I was starting to come up and knew that my time at KQ2 was coming to a close, because I just felt like my time had come to an end. Not that Chris was pushing me out yet, but I was like, I needed to find that next step and something to do, and I want to stay somewhat tied into sports in some capacity. And so before Rick Muntean left and Kai took over as GM, I said something to Rick about it. He's like, just go ask Dan, go say something to him. Just throw it out there. You never know what could happen. And I said something to Kai, and Kai was like, yeah, we could use another person in the front office if possible. And so I kind of went to Dan. I was like, man, I really have no experience outside of anything sports media related. And I know that the job would probably come with some sales and some other business related things. And I've never done any of that, but would you mind taking the flyer on me? And sure enough, he was all in and was gracious and worked with me through some of those growing pains, was happy to have me aboard. And just, for a guy that was that successful business wise, he really was just super generous on the other side of things, of knowing that a guy that wanted to be able to break away from the media side, have more time at home with family, but still stay connected in that way. And Dan was all for it in any way. So he was always great to myself, my wife, Maddie, and my son, Nolan, and anything he could ever do to help, he was always right there. And so I always thought, for a guy that really didn't know me very well, to take just a chance on me like that and give me that opportunity to where now I'm doing much of the same at Northwest sales wise and kind of trying to branch out to other areas that I wouldn't have had that opportunity if not for Dan. So he was pretty big in helping me continue to move on professionally.
You ever play ping pong with him?
No ping pong. I don't know if Dan was aware of those games, what we would do here, but I would tell you the fun part about Dan too is just his kind of personality, and we could always, Dan was very serious, disciplined, and expect you to get your job done, but then you could also have fun with it. Every day was fun for us. I go back to, kind of that first time with Matt and Dan, and maybe I think Husky was there as well. Our first lunch we had at Pappy's. Dan always bonded over food. He would take us out to Grinauer. We went to Jack Stack one year. But you were always in for something. Dan always, you would always walk away with a laugh. But I think he used food as a way to bond with people, and it was kind of his love language. Apparently, he really loved Matt Johnson.
Oh yeah, we loved each other. We did.
You bought him food too?
I don't know if I ever bought Dan food. I don't know if Dan ever gave me the chance to let me buy him food. We'd have the occasional celebration.
He would bring just appreciative of our clubhouse or our intern staff. He always wanted to make sure everyone felt like they were important. And so one time Dan loved Donut King. It's in North Kansas City, and sometimes he would show up to Mink League meetings or to a day with like 3 boxes of donuts. And there were some specific ones that he loved. He told me, and Dan would tell me, it was, you think we talk about business or Mustang stuff, but he's telling me, like this just jelly-filled donut with the sugar on top. It's the best you want. And sometimes that would be the topic of our conversation for the day. Or he would talk about, he also loved Dominic's in Parkville, and he would just bring us a whole tray of lasagna. And I'll never, after he bought the lasagna, he figured out the price. And I think only one time we had that tray of lasagna. It was really good lasagna though.
I bet.
There was one time we met in North Kansas City after I'd been at Northwest for a while, and I had some meetings in Kansas City, and so I called him, and so we met for lunch at, was it Chapels down there?
Yeah,
sports
like
bar.
Chapels.
And
Yep.
Sports museum.
Love Chapels.
It was great. And then he's like, hey, Donut King. It's right. You got to try it. Best donuts you got to try them. You got to try them. Okay, that's fine. So we went over there and went over to Donut King, and he bought a dozen donuts for me to take home just for Maddie and I. And I'm like, damn, I don't need all these donuts. Just take them. They're fantastic donuts. You got to have them. All right, man. And he was right. They're great.
He would call in advance because like the donut that he loved would sell out, and so he would reserve it at like 3:00 in the afternoon, and he had to make sure you got the donut that he liked. So he, like I said, food was absolutely his love language, but he also wanted to take care of people. You know, I remember many a times when we would go out to those dinners and we'd share a dessert with one fork. That was always
one fork. So
Special moment.
It was the first Christmas I was there. It was Dan, Kai, Brandon Husky, and myself, and we went to Boudreaux's, and that was kind of just for our staff right there, real quick, of like, oh, I'll buy you guys lunch for like our little Christmas thing or whatever. Like, that's fine. And we ate, and then he ordered like a cheesecake, one piece of cheesecake for the table, and they brought 4 forks out, and you 3 started eating, and I'm like, I can't do this. I can't sit here and share a piece of cheesecake with 3 other adult men.
But even just like last Christmas, he heard, you know, some of us were getting together as you know, Matt, Tim, Tyler, no, Chris. Yeah, Chris was there.
Yeah, thank you.
Caleb, Gabe Squirt Wells, and so. But Dan was just like, "Oh, why didn't you tell me?" And Dan sent us like 8 pizzas. You know, next day the frozen, whatever, the special dry ice, just immediately, so that, you know, we could all have these pizzas from Dan. And it, you know, like I said, that was just who he was.
Wait, he sent the pizzas after we got together, so you had all those to yourself, or did we have pizza?
We
'Cause I
had
don't
pizzas
remember.
those nights. Yeah, Chris.
Weird how Chris doesn't
Dicky Two's
remember
drug
that.
testing's not that good
I don't
enough.
remember
Yeah,
what we ate.
Dicky T needs to up their drug testing policy.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, yeah, we did. You're right. Because we also had dip too. But anyway, moving on.
It's all coming back to you now, Chris. What about your first impression of Dan? Because I remember, you know, you started actually as an intern, and you know, meeting Dan probably at a game, I would assume. How'd that go for you?
So yeah, it was your first year as a general manager. Was my first year interning, because I went and interviewed with Rick, and Rick's like, "Great, you're hired." And then Rick leaves a month later, and I remember Chucky Kempf and I going, "Great, we don't have an internship now, probably because the new guy's taking over, and who knows what this new guy wants to do." And didn't know Kai at the time. We just knew Kai was director of fun when I went in the office, and I was like, I don't know what director of fun does, but we'll find out. And so, yeah, I remember you taking over. I remember Dan first time walking into I think it was the office, and you kind of said, "Hey, things need to be sharp. Dan's coming in." And I remember a couple of us were like, "The owner's coming in," and we see him walk in, like you guys talked about. Dan's got that kind of like swag, Dan swag. The way he walks, it wasn't like a power strut necessarily, but it was more like a, you know, Dan's here. And I don't remember what he said.
Could you demonstrate? I'm not sure that I can picture it right now.
I'm not going to demonstrate because I'm also only like 5'9", so the power strut doesn't work when you're 5'9", but it works when you're what, 6'4", whatever Dan was, or yeah, 6'4" probably. Who knows? Anyway, just remember him walking in and just kind of either like looking for stuff, or I was like, yeah, this needs to be fixed. But man, the one night I'll never forget, it was when Kai had his frozen night there in 2014.
Very cold. Yeah.
No, it was not. It was uncomfortably warm. What was it, 5,000 plus? And
5,345.
thank you. And I was supposed to be up in the press box doing either the live stream or something. And I don't remember what Chucky and I were doing. I ran down to get something. Dan stops me, pulls me, and goes, "You're on hot dog duty now." And at first I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here, because I just saw him rip the other kid or whoever it was off the hot dog duty because we weren't making enough hot dogs fast enough.
That was our job titles, hot dog duty. I hope that's on your resume.
It is.
We also knew that you spent a lot of time around the concession stand, so your familiarity with food,
Some
free
things don't
food.
change.
Wow, I did not spend that much time around the concession stand.
You know, Chris, that speaking of your time in your first internship, and I'm sure both Matts can attest to this, is, you know, Dan would ask you to do. He would ask for the moon, no matter the resources. And a lot of times he would give us the resources, but he wasn't always, not being in it day to day. He wasn't really sure what it would take. And I remember, Chris, your first year when you were live streaming games with Chucky. You're a sports director at KQ2, and Chucky is now on ESPN doing some very high level games. And the resources we had, would you mind telling me what you used to live stream our games that first year in 2014?
Yeah, one of those small little handheld video cameras, because Dan was like, "This will work great for this," and the zoom on these small handhelds weren't great then, and still aren't great now if you buy one. But Dan was like confident this one was going to work, and at times it didn't. And we'd find out from Kai or somebody else like, "Hey, Dan wants to know why the stream's not doing well." We're like, "Well, we're trying with the device we have."
It was
And
just like a home video camera, like you would record like your home Christmases, and they're trying to live stream games go in and out. And Dan would be furious if you didn't follow the ball or whatever the quality was. I don't know how we did that. And
well,
but I mean, he just expected the best. And you know what? You would say, "I'll do it, whatever you need."
and we were trying different plans. We were trying to go different places. We tried to go the outfield out and on the party deck. And he's like, "Yeah, this would be good." And we're like, "Yeah, we'll run stuff." And we're like, "Dan, the internet's not reaching out here." He goes, "Well, it should."
Make it
We're
work.
like, "Well, we're trying, but it's not working." And then I don't know if we had the idea or he did about going up to the old press box on the very, very top.
Oh,
And that maybe, yeah, it might have been like a 95-degree day. We're like, whatever, we'll try it. We open up and a huge wasp nest comes out at us. And we're like, yeah, there's no chance we're going in this thing. No chance.
It was good enough for Greg Kastner for years, but you won't go up there and take out one wasp nest.
I'm not going to get stung.
or the family of raccoons that were living there.
I hope the camera was rolling while you got stung. That would be like the greatest moment ever. Like you're trying to broadcast a game and you're swatting at bees and wasps.
Yeah, we never even plugged it in up there because we're like, we're going to have to run. I don't think the power may have worked up there, but I don't remember. But he was like, well, just find a way. And if anybody knows Chucky got flustered pretty quickly then and probably still does today. He was like,
What about
we just can't do it.
Matt? That first team, I mean, just because, I don't, Dan had coached with Mac Insights. I know he's with Jeff Montgomery coaching a team, and then he coached his younger son's team. What about you, like, and having those conversations with him, telling him what you needed? Because from the outside, you don't really know what it takes to run a baseball team or day-to-day stuff. And obviously you did. So you had to be the one to tell him what you needed. How'd that go for you?
It went really, really well. I asked for everything that you could possibly imagine. Everything. You name it, I asked for it. This is how many baseballs we're going to need because we're going to be giving them away at games. And this is how many bats I need. This is how many practice balls we need because I want them to be throwing white batting practice. And I want them, white baseballs in the bullpen. This is what we needed. I had a list of stuff thinking, coming from a college, thinking, I'm going to get 50% of this. Maybe. If I get 50%, that's a win. And he was like, okay, if that's what we need, that's a great deal. Perfect. I'll get it all for you. He said, but there's one thing that we got to keep in mind here with all of this. I'm like, okay, that sounds great. Okay, what is it? You got to win.
No pressure, right?
I said, okay, perfect. And then Rick pulled me aside later thinking, okay, Rick's going to, it's just the owner, And Rick's like, you realize you really got to win, right? And I'm like, well, that's why I took the job. It's because I want to win. But yeah, okay. I guess that sounds like a plan.
Dan would tell you that, like he was like, I don't, it's we're playing and kind of give you the wishy-washy stuff. But then, if we lost like 4 or 5 games in a row, he'd say, "What's going on?" And he'd want to like, "Should I go in there and flip a table? Like the food. What should I do?" Like, Dan, I don't think you should. No,
they're not eating today.
Whenever you did start things up in 2009, you've got this owner who you know, but you don't know really well, and Rick's there. And did it feel like there was some pressure going into like the first couple games, or was Dan kind of, even though he told you to win, was it kind of he understands it's year one and this is a newer thing for St. Joe since the Saints left town?
I think it was. 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 I think it I think it was a mix of both. He really wanted to win. Like that was not even like the first couple years. I think until he realized I kind of knew what I was doing, he was always asking questions on strategy and how would you do this or why'd you do that, or it was a lot of conversations that way. Um, I think if we wouldn't have won, I mean, I don't even want to think what that would have been like, but because I was pissed off we lost in the regional when we had our opportunity to go to the NBC. I thought it was a failure that we didn't, and we lost. We lost by a half a game in the North, and I thought that was a failure. And then Rick and Dan both came up to me afterwards, like, "Hey, that was a great year. Attendance was great. People had a great experience. It was all about the fan." And that's when I realized that, it's more than just baseball. I've always been on, it's just baseball, it's just baseball, it's just baseball. And then he, put that into perspective of, yeah, it's more than baseball. It's about fans having a good experience, and it's about kids coming to the park. And I mean, I got a lot of jokes for years, and you guys were in the dugout. It was Johnson's daycare running around in the dugout. But Dan wanted that. He wanted those kids to be able to walk away and look at those guys as larger than life. So, yeah.
That, but I'll never forget too that you guys were in the NBC, and I think it was I forget what year it was, but that was the year that the young boy tragically got hit in the head with, and his response, like, he was always on top of everything, and like he did not wait to respond to anything. If he saw something that that safety was such a big deal for him, but I mean, he would tell you immediately, like, we'd be fine, everything would be fun and butterflies. But if he saw a potential issue, he would come right to you, and you had to change then on anything.
Yeah, even
and
with
so
my own kids.
Yeah, and it was tough. And he would tell me, hey, he told me, hey, go tell Matt he's got to have his son here or there. And I'm like, well, it's Matt's son. Go do it. I'm like, all right.
I remember you coming into my office on that day. I remember that, and I'm like, I can't say what I said on live, but I knew you were the sacrificial lamb coming into this. I knew you were the sacrificial lamb.
He did that to me a lot.
Yeah,
he did. Did you ever get to hear? He always bragged about his broadcasts at the NBC in Wichita with Dave Riggert, when like our guys were around the field and Dan would just like go crazy, and him, and I don't know if you ever got a chance to hear those, but Dan loved doing that.
I did. I went and listened to all of them. He absolutely loved that experience, even though he tried to make it the most cost-effective trip ever down to the NBC. He deep down in, he enjoyed every second that we spent money for that. He really did.
Yeah.
He loved it. The guys had a great experience. He definitely loved the announcing. Like that was his bread and butter. Like that was probably the greatest thing that he ever did, or he would say he ever did within the organization, was broadcast those games.
Dan knew a little bit of everything. I mean, you go back to like when he would listen to sound effects and music, and Dan would say, well, I was a DJ in college, and I should, this is what we should be doing. Or then he would, he also pitched when he was at Tulane. We could never find his stats, but then he would also kind of give you on the field playing advice. Promotions, there's absolutely, but my favorite advice from Dan was July 4th. Matt was coaching a game, and we were winning handedly, and the game looked like it was going to end around 9:00 before it was going to be dark outside. And that's when Dan took it upon himself to mention to Matt, come over here, middle of a game. Slow. I need you to do some mound visits. Slow the game down. Fireworks. It's not going to be dark out. I'll never forget Matt's face.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, the answer was always okay. Okay. And I think that night we almost finished it on July 5th because it went into extra innings when they made this miraculous comeback, and I think we finished in like 13 or 14 innings.
Yes. Yeah, I do remember that. That was an absolute nightmare, trying to slow a game down and still trying to win it. But like you said, it's whatever Dan needed to get done. We would do our best to make it happen. That was probably the most unusual request I've ever had, managing a game in my life.
Well, there was roughly, I think at that point, like 25 people left in the stands. It got to the point where we felt bad that we're shooting fireworks this late, and everyone had already left. But Dan his original intent was he wanted everyone to see them so that they could leave. It was all about the baseball, but then he also didn't want to disappoint the fans and people in attendance. He wanted them to see the fireworks. And so he in those first years, I would have to talk him off of turning off the lights, shooting the fireworks show, and then resuming the game after we got the lights back on, just so that people could see the fireworks.
Dan was the ultimate customer service guy, right? Like he wanted the quality baseball. He wanted the wins. He wanted to have the good promotions and the fan experience, getting the party deck built out there. I mean, he was always what's best for the fan. And so I think it's funny when you think about going through and asking for, Coach Johnson of asking for the moon and like, all right, Dan, well, I need this, this, and this. And he says, okay, but you better win. Like, I always felt like too, he put a lot of expectations on Kai for certain things too, with attendance and with the baseball and getting wins. But there's also a certain amount of freedom too of like, all right, I'll let you go out and do this, but make sure it's done right if we're going to do it. And I think some of the promotions you came up with, I thought were insane, but they worked and Dan was okay with it because they were executed well.
If you would ask Dan for a pen, for example, then he would find a way to give in to you, but you would also have to give in something to him as well. Like I'll give you a pen, but you've got to write me, a 10-page essay on, just something like it was just, an analogy for Dan. He would always find a way to say yes to what you wanted, but he would find a way to get something he wanted out of a deal too. And that was always interesting. I think, business wise for Dan, he was always, so far ahead of people just because he always found wins that worked for everybody.
That's how we got the camera that year we interned. We got the camera, and he got to see us go up in the wasp-infested press box up top. So, win-win for everybody, I guess. He get to see his almost.
Deep down, he probably knew there were wasps up in there, and he needed them cleared out. But instead of having the insect people come and take care of it, he thought, you know what? I'm going to send Chris up there with a camera and see if we can get rid of them and kill two birds with one stone.
Was I one of the things? We'll see what happens if he gets stung by a wasp. We'll see if he's allergic or not.
You were one of the birds getting killed.
Was I one of the birds there in that situation?
Yeah, he pulled me and Kai aside one day and said, how do I get rid of Chris? Here's what you do.
I've been trying to shake him for years.
I was going to say, one of my promotions wise, those first years, when he took a chance, first off, when I came on and I was seasonal and Dan's expectations for me, like I'll never forget like the pressure that I put upon myself. Like Dan forced you to be better at what you were doing. There's no question. Like, for me, like, and I was just a knucklehead 22, 23-year-old kid when I just started. And, like his expectation level, like, I was appreciative of the job, but what he expected out of me it's not something I was prepared for. And sometimes he would be very direct and tell me exactly what he wanted, which was hard, like, especially I wasn't used to that sort of criticism. And so I think, I don't know if any of you guys ever experienced that. Like I was so frustrated. I was like, what'd I do wrong? I'm trying. And, I know we've all dealt with him in different stuff, but I know that he expected us to push ourselves and match his expectation.
Yeah, I think there were a couple times that we would have some meetings and it'd be leading into that summer of 2016. And it was, we need to accomplish this, this, and this. How can we get it done? And we would kind of start out down that road. And then all of a sudden, Dane would come up and have like this idea that was out of left field. And the conversation would drastically go off course for about an hour and a half. And then he wanted to get something done. He wanted an answer. But then we would take it so off course that by the time he came back around, he's like, well, I got to go to Kansas City for another meeting. And we wouldn't actually get it done. And so it was kind of hard to match those expectations at times because he did have just a lot going on in his mind that is what made him great and a great entrepreneur. But also at times you're kind of like, man, Dan, like we need to get back over here.
I'm going to reference exactly what Matt's talking about. We had a meeting at the Candlewood and we were talking about, just different sales goals and stuff we were going to do. And he asked us for some different ideas for the season. And so Matt or Kyle Turner suggested we do like a barbecue cook-off. I mean, with Dan, we we applied every idea, and Matt wanted to do like a, American Royal barbecue tasting. It's, middle of America, whatever. People love their barbecue. And somehow it deviated. Matt, what was the final suggestion from Dan? He took your idea and
He wanted
said
to do
no.
basically a bake sale and have fans bring in baked goods. Like, Dan, you just said we can't have people coming in without health inspectors and certain things, but you want them to bake in their homes and bring it
Cookies and pies.
and sell it. Cookies and pies, pennies and dimes,
It kind of reminds me of that. I will remember this one when he wanted to do the animal shelter story a couple years ago, and
Matt, you were still managing then, I think.
There it was.
Maybe?
No, it was 2018 or 19.
17.
It was after.
It was the guy from Salvi, Matthews.
I think it was after Matt left.
Who's the guy?
He's from Salvi, Regina. I forget. So anyway, Chris, tell us the story, and then we'll see.
Jonathan Lynch.
So I think it started. We were at FanFest at Hy-Vee. I think that's when it started. Was Dan wanted to do something with the animal shelter that was a little bit different than just the normal, hey, Mustangs players go down to the animal shelter and spend some time, get some video of them doing that, and put that out there as a story. Dan wanted a player to adopt a dog, and we follow the entire process, like through and how they're going and everything like that. So we're getting the idea going. He pulled me aside and goes, hey, get video of us talking about this, right? Get video of them talking about this here. And I was like, okay, we're in Hy-Vee, just standing there. I'm on my phone video. And I don't remember who the guy was, but he wasn't an overly big talker there at Hy-Vee anyway. He was kind of quieter guy. And I just remember, I think Dan was just throwing a bunch of ideas at me and him. And I think it was the Vanovers were the ones that were there with us too. So, yeah, I got distracted by the photo of guy in his elf costume next to Dan in his
nice.
shirt. Yeah, wow.
Look at that mustache on Brady.
Wow.
Yes, that's dirty.
Well, Dan just like I said, he wanted to do stuff different his own way, and he wasn't afraid to ask for us to, when we had our own ideas of ways of doing things, but he would do the same and expect you to pull them off. And so it was easier to pull off our own ideas, but when it was Dan's ideas, oh boy, sometimes he came up with a doozy. And so, he wanted him to adopt a dog and to follow the entire story. And sounds easy in asking, but the task was pretty monumental in doing that and doing it the right way. So
I remember we went down to the shelter. We got the video of him finding a dog he liked. Got video there. We kind of talked to Animal Shelter, and we talked to him a little bit about what dog he liked. But Dan wanted this to be a full documentary thing. And
like Netflix style documentary.
Yeah, like he's like, this would be great. And I'm sure it would have been, but the thing was the player wasn't a big talker. He didn't really bring the dog around a lot to the ballpark, and like every other day Dan would come up to a game, or maybe once a week, be like, how's the animal shelter thing going? I was like, oh, good Dan, great. We're getting there, knowing full well that we've made zero progress. That we're getting
the best Dan's idea that he had that just did not work out was he wanted to synchronize our fireworks shows to music. And the time he suggested Freebird. Dan loved Freebird. And, actually the day after Dan passed, I had to listen to it and just got took me back there. Dan wanted.
Can we break news right now? Summer of 2024, we will have fireworks to Freebird happening.
Well, we did not break that news right now. It's possible, we might be able to do a Freebird. I don't know if it'll be synchronized, but we did a synchronized show to Freebird. Thank you for that, Kyle Tritton. But
it's Turner.
Which everything was all set up and it was perfect. The fireworks and music. Again, it sounds easier than what it is. And I think they had like a 2 or 3 second delay. And I'll never forget just Dan being so furious because it was almost right there, but we weren't there. And no one knew it but Dan and a handful of us. And just how he turned it into a joke probably a week later, but the day later, he was still so furious about it just didn't happen. And but like everything, if it didn't work out, it turned into something that you could laugh about, pretty quickly afterwards.
We talk about the sacrificial lamb thing where Kai was the sacrificial lamb for Matt a few times when he'd come in when Dan had to do something. I remember interning when I need a player or something. He'd be like, "How's it going today?" He's like, "No, I'm just working on this, but I need a player." He goes, "Go get him." And again, I'm like 20, 21 going into the clubhouse going, "Am I really going to just yell at the players that come out here?" And Dan's like, "Yeah, just go get them." And I'm like, "Okay, what if they don't want to do it?" He goes, "Man, Dan didn't care." Dan was just like, "Just go get them." So I remember those type of things of like, "Okay, well, cool. I'm just interning here, and I don't know these guys, and I think a couple of them have been here a few years older than me, and I'm going to tell them to come and do this." Yeah, good
Well,
luck to
Matt,
them.
I think with Matt, like he always, I mean, they were always an open book, and everyone had a story to tell. And Dan, he would come in with his first day of speaking to them and letting them know what's going on. And we had the media day, and Dan would always be there, in those first years to greet everybody. And most of the years during Dan's watch, he kind of set that expectation. Matt, I don't know if you ever do any of those, Dan's speeches to players, any of them stick out, or the gist of what he said?
None of them really stuck out. He just wanted to talk in front of the guys because he really loved baseball.
Yeah.
Loved being a part of that atmosphere. And in my office when I got there at 1:00, just wanted to talk baseball. But yeah, he always wanted to make sure he had the first 5 minutes of every team meeting that we had. And then once that 5 minutes was up, he was gone. Like that was it. He was done. He just wanted to announce his presence. I'm here. We're going to do everything we can. I mean, his message was the same. It was, we're going to do everything we can to win. We can for you guys to have a great experience. We want to make sure that you understand how important you are to the community and how much the community is involved with you. Because a lot of players wouldn't quite understand, exactly what that was until about 2 or 3 days in. They're like, "Oh man, we're like big league baseball players here." And Dan just wanted to emphasize the community service, the community involvement, and make sure that you're taking care of yourselves. Like we had so many rules to make sure you had the perception of certain things. Guys always wore their shirts, their hats, their practice gear was always worn the same way. What it's going to be like.
And something else, Dan, we actually talked about this a number of times. We would just talk on the phone, and at one point he said, we got to come up with the top 10 moments in Mustangs history. And that's what's kind of sad for me, like there's only a limited amount of people that, that some of the memories that we've had here since 2009, there's just a handful of people. And Dan would always tell me, you got to come up with a list. And after we talk about it, then he'd tell me I had to write it down. I'm like, well, Dan, that list was like here, there, everywhere. I have no idea what we just said in the past 30 seconds, let alone. But I will share with you guys a few of the ones, because I found a text that I had sent to actually Matt Tritton between Dan, myself, and Matt. Some of the stuff that did make the list, I can't list them all. Number one was absolutely Abe Lincoln puking at home plate after he gave the Gettysburg Address. Dan, kind of went along for the deal, and I guaranteed him it'd be fine. And, it's Abe Lincoln, and then Abe showed up in his summer coat, got a little bit warm, and he vomited all over home plate. Abe Lincoln was a legend for that. And again, a week later, we could laugh. I mean, Abe Lincoln made the top of Dan's list, and so he loved that moment. Another time was when a former mayor, Dan, was out there for his first pitch, and so the mayor, Dan wasn't involved in the city council at all, and so during this time, and so he hadn't been in St. Joe as much, and so the city has been great, and they established a relationship, and so he just wasn't as involved during the time, and so we had just, the mayor did the first pitch, and he walked up to Dan, and he said, he goes, "Hi, I'm Dan," and his response to Dan was, "What is it that you do with the Mustangs?" And Dan just looked at him and he said, "Nothing." Just, and he never went any further than that. He just left it at that. He does nothing, and just that's Dan. Just I don't know. And also at the top of the list was when Rowley got kicked out of a game. Speaking of home plate, when he used his tail, Matt, you'd actually gotten kicked out of the same game, along with a few players. And then Rowley came out and cleaned off home plate with his tail, and also got ejected from that game.
Oh yes,
No,
I remember those days.
there was also
I remember.
a fake Rowley Twitter, which was none of us, but Dan would always just get a chuckle out of the things that were said, and it kind of led into like some other teams having fake Twitter accounts that just would tweet stuff that probably wouldn't be said, especially from a team perspective, but just funny stuff that if you had a sense of humor, you'd be able to laugh about. And Dan liked to laugh.
Yeah.
We've also got to go back to the time, speaking of Abe Lincoln, the reason why we had Abe is because a few years prior, for 3 years prior, we had the bald eagle. Dan loved Lewis, the name of the eagle, and thought he was the most intimidating thing. But then Lewis flying off the field every year, including out of the stadium, into the city councilman's yard pool party at the time.
I like
Chris,
when he
you're
almost
just
grabbed the
smiling.
small child up the left field line.
What was the eagle or Dan?
No, the eagle. The eagle landed next to
Right
the
by the
small
bounce
child.
house. Yeah, that was right by the
Playing
bounce
up on
house
the
first year.
left field field.
Yeah, that was the first year, and then second year they couldn't fly because they had been chased by drones, and they were kind of skittish.
Yep.
And but they brought two, and then the third year the eagle flew out and landed in Spanky's backyard. Dan did list.
He came back in practice all the time.
Yeah. Dan did list in our
practice. He came right back.
Top moments was the amount of concessions lost in the summers that Chris worked for the Mustangs.
Wow.
Those, and he just helped himself.
I don't think I had much at all. That right.
This is Dan's list. I'm not going to go against it.
It's fine. Whatever.
I mean, there was quite a few. Some we can't list them all, but I mean,
Was that the only one on the list, or what?
The game that he loved though that stood out. I think for us was the 2021 championship when we had that miraculous comeback up in Clarinda. The first championship, when it was like 1,000 degrees, and was that the no-hitter by Maddox? I think maybe.
Maddox.
Yeah, and then the other one that really sticks is the poke in the smoke from Kyle Urich when July 4th, and
against Sedalia.
We couldn't see the ball. Yeah, we couldn't see where the ball went because the haze in the air from all the fireworks around the stadium.
Yes, that was always our favorite day of 4th of July when it sounded like a military base during the entire game.
Dan said a moment like that, you have to name it. And so he came up with the poke in the smoke. That was all him. People don't understand, like, he didn't take credit for, he would push credit onto other people, but like some of the stuff we did, especially community-wise, I mean, he was always, he not only was he all in, but he was behind a lot of the different ideas of stuff that we did. Just because, and he would always say, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it the right way. And, he would always be all in on community stuff, or just if we had an idea, we were going to do it. He did get a kick out of the time that, and he wanted a picture that I never saw. It was when Matt Tritton was in full Mustangs uniform. The time he was in your clubhouse when he was helping out with the team. That was the one picture he wanted.
I should have printed one off and sent it to him. Had I known.
You have it?
Should have.
Of course. It's framed
never
behind
seen
me.
We can't see it though.
Oh, well. Go to Maryville sometime. I'll show you.
Okay.
Wow.
Matt, I know we're going to
Okay.
get with we're going to pivot a little bit, and we're going to visit with a member from Dan's GM at his Big Biscuits. Is there anything before? I know you're busy today too. We're excited to have Jace back on the team in 2024. Can we break that as well as Freebird?
Yeah. I don't see why you can't. Didn't he talk? I mean, it's up to him. I don't know what he's doing. I'll see him tonight.
He doesn't have a choice. You're his father.
As
So.
far as I know, he's back.
And
he down
rest
told me I
goes-
needed to come back to coach if that was going to be the case, and I said nope. I had way too much fun sitting and watching in the stands this year.
Well, and I'll never forget, too, like the group text with us after Jace had his first outing, and just Dan being so proud of him, and he watched, and Dan Fashion also always asks you about your family, and I also have to include that your daughter looks like she's doing pretty well softball wise, and
Yeah, Dan would always ask about all those things. That was the unique part. He would always, it'd be, and when I stopped coaching, it was random, just out in the middle of nowhere. I'd get a text from Dan, "Hey, how's Brindley doing?" Then we'd talk for a little bit while, or we'd run into each other because he lived in North Kansas City there for a while, so we went out to eat a couple times, and we met up a few other occasions. He would come over to the high school, where Jace played. I mean, he was constantly involved. When he was invested in you, he was invested in you for life.
yeah. I've also got to include, I'm going over our texts. I look back at some of our group texts, and this one's with Dan where Matt suggested that we write a screenplay, and I suggested only if nudity was allowed in the the movie. But Matt suggested that Donald Sutherland should play Dan, and or Danny DeVito.
Is this Matt Johnson or Matt Tritton saying this?
Tritton.
I don't remember this.
So Dan said it'd be a great documentary. It'd still be great to have a film crew all around all summer. Just the stories and everything that would happen. I mean, Dan just liked to tell the stories and laugh about it.
So we get Donald Sutherland for Dan. Does that mean Kevin Costner for Matt Johnson, or maybe like a Denzel?
I was thinking the exact same thing. Let's go with Kevin Costner. I'll take it.
I'd pay a lot of money to see Danny DeVito play Dan, though. I'd pay a lot of money for that one.
Great businessman.
Dan's alter ego.
And then,
Yes.
of course, playing Kai would be Carrot Top.
Just smashing good time. Yeah, that the guy, he smashes things, right? Or he pulls it out the treasure chest.
Gallagher.
Yeah, you're way off.
Potato, Gallagher versus Goliath.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, Matt, we appreciate you spending the time with us today. Hopefully we see you back at the ballpark in 2024, and we're cheering on Jason and seeing the rest of the family.
I'm excited for it. I'm really excited for it. Now, the question I have, kind of off script here, is what are we going to name within the Mink League for Dan? Something to think about. I don't know if you've thought about that already.
We are going to do some stuff to honor him. We got some fun ideas. Within the Mink League, I know we're going to do some fun stuff here in his honor. So I just want to make sure, again, in Dan fashion, that we can pull it off the right way. Because we're going to do it. We're going to do it well. But we're absolutely going to honor him, and I'm sure there's going to be some humor in things we do as Dan would want it. But we're also, it's just going to want to have teeth and to make sense. And so we'll see. That's still to be determined. But if you or for anyone else who actually is watching this has any ideas, I mean, I know we affected a lot of different people, and so we'd love to hear some of those thoughts. Because again, that's typical Dan. He listened to customer and get their feedback, and so we'd like to hear what maybe some people have to say.
Well, one thing about it was, Matt talking about how he wanted these kids to come in and feel like they're major leaguers, and he treated them right and got them the gear and the community engagement to where you'd have 3,000 or 4,000 people in the stands on a Saturday night. And for as much as the rest of the Mink League hated St. Joseph at times because the winning and everything around it, and a lot of you guys get to play in front of so many people. We only have 100 coming out to our games. I think that everybody wanted to be at Phil Welch Stadium playing on a Saturday night, to be in that environment, whether you were playing for the Mustangs or you were the team that was hated playing across the way. There was not an atmosphere in the Midwest that matched what Phil Welch Stadium was. And of course, starts with Dan, and then of course Matt and Kai and Rick and everybody building that up. I mean, that's pretty huge. So
I think it all started with, people would tell you, you look at baseball and how it's come in and out of Phil Welch. He would always ask you to do the impossible, and you would find out that it was possible. And so, in a lot of different things that he asked us, I mean, every one of us in just different situations. And I think people told Dan this was impossible. The Mustangs would be impossible, and here we are. I mean, look at what a wonderful, beautiful thing that it's turned into. That was Dan's. I think that's, you could never. I mean, it's just the impossible became possible with him. I don't think there's any better way of saying it. Welcome, Elise. Elise, tell us, you've done a lot with Dan, but we're sharing this on the Mustang side. Tell us, your connection.
Okay, so my connection with Dan, and I've worked beside Dan for 10 years, for him for 12 years. But in 2000, Dan opened the Big Biscuit in Independence, and in 2008 he opened the Big Biscuit in Blue Springs. And it was about 2 years in, he he put his faith in me to run the Blue Springs location, and shortly after that I took charge of Independence as well as his general manager of both locations. I was honored to do that and be beside Dan in the business with his restaurants. He taught me how to take charge and be successful at running a business. He was always full of useful information, always trying to teach me something, always trying to give me a business lesson, like Kai said to me before.
He was always full of those business lessons, like he would just tell you, remember this, I should charge you for this. This is a lesson. Don't you forget.
Yes. So he was my partner in the Big Biscuits for a long time. We overcame a lot together, especially when it came to the pandemic and going down to the to-goes only. I mean, even Kai came out and helped with the video, but we tried. Dan always wanted to make all the customers feel as welcome as possible, and that was a hard hit, going down to the to-goes, and it was really confusing for everybody how to handle it. But he wanted everybody to still feel comfortable and still feel like they were in a restaurant, and we provided that for them, and it was wonderful. I mean, we did amazing things together. We really did. After the pandemic, we had a wonderful conversations about how well the business came back. It came back way better than before, and we were so shocked, so surprised. It was amazing and wonderful, sometimes unexplainable, but we were so grateful.
I got to ask you, Elise. So, Dan didn't show up to every game. He's a busy guy and just didn't want to make it out every time. But
oh yeah,
we would know when Dan was in, or sometimes I would kind of put out the bird call, the bat signal that Dan was coming.
Yeah.
At the restaurant, I can only imagine what that looked like. I mean,
oh yeah, it was a good couple weeks of Dan's coming. We got to get this place shining and perfect, and nothing can be wrong. The employees there did have a lot of appreciation for Dan because he did a lot for the employees as well as the community, but they weren't on a personal level. They didn't get the real Dan feeling on a personal level. But that is how he wanted it to be.
Well, and I talk about his attention. Go ahead.
He kind of played a good cop, bad cop. He I was always the good cop. He was always the bad cop, and that's how he wanted it to be.
Same here. He would always tell us, do the same here. And so, but I talk about, you kind of brought it up, like his attention to detail. Like he would tell me at the Biscuit, like the pictures that he would select for the walls,
yes,
the music that was played. I know how many times you guys have probably printed off the menu, but and just the presentation of food and how he specifically wanted it. And I go back to, for us and how how tedious he was at times in like our pocket schedules and program guides, and Matt writing a press release. He went over every detail. And if we did a Facebook post,
Oh yeah.
holy cow,
Oh yeah.
and so he had to look over every single detail because he wanted it to be perfect for the customer.
Exactly.
He came
Everything was
in.
always perfect for the customers.
You mentioned it before, at least just the expectations that Dan would bring in. And so Kai, I worked under Kai, and so we still had plenty of interactions, but I felt like Kai kind of got more of the magnifying glass in that way. But on your side of the Big Biscuit and feeling some of those expectations, especially a guy that is a savvy businessman like that,
Oh yeah.
which can be intimidating, but you kind of touched on it there. Just, it felt like there was a lot of support. Like, he expected things to be done a certain way. We also do want to be there to step in and help where he could and lend a lot of that advice. And I don't feel like you get that with a lot of business owners, to where, hey, this is what I expect, but I'm also willing to come in and get my hands dirty to help when I have to also.
Right, and give you information that you can take not only now, but carry it with you forever and make really good decisions with it.
Mm-hmm.
Elise, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, but I'm going to talk. I'm going to give you a chance before I ask, I'm going to ask the question and then speak a little bit. But there's got to be a moment, where he came in and you can maybe find humorous now, where he asked you something that didn't really, make sense, or it was Dan's way of doing things. Just that is a funny story, maybe put you under a little bit of pressure, or just made you feel like, what in the heck is he asking for? Though, and the reference, I'll tell you from the baseball side, we were just talking with our former manager, Matt Johnson. One time he asked us to pretty much slow down, even maybe stop a game so that we could get to fireworks. The middle of the baseball game, he wanted to stop because he wanted to get to fireworks, or slow the game down because it wasn't dark enough yet for fireworks. And sometimes that blew up in our face, but it was always just kind of humorous. You know what? Dan's asking, so do we do this or not? Was there anything like that, that he asked of you? Or so the time that Chris was actually an intern doing video stuff for us. And so Dan was unhappy with the quality of our hot dogs at the time. And so whatever Chris was doing, he had to drop, because Chris was the first guy to walk by, and he put Chris on the grill cooking the hot dogs because someone had to be better than the person that was doing it at the time. Is there anything like that you can recall?
Yeah, and it's going to be a little different, obviously, because baseball's different than the restaurants. But yeah, I do recall this funny experience that we had. We were talking about it was probably our down season, our downtime, and we were trying to eliminate labor costs and get rid of some people where we could, or just try to save some money. And so he was asking me about a host that we had. We had a weekly host at the Blue Springs location, but not the Independence location. So he wanted to get rid of the host during the week, and why can't we do that, Elise? We don't have one in Independence. What's the deal? We don't need to be paying this person all this money to host. And I said, all right, Dan, but Blue Springs is different than Independence. You have to remember, like, as soon as you walk in the door at Independence, somebody's right there to greet you. But as in Blue Springs, we could be way over at the drink station. Sometimes people, the elderly people can't hear us. They don't know. And they're just standing up there. So it kind of, but if this is what you really want me to do, I'll take the host away, because he was dead set on it. Let's just get rid of them. They can handle it. They can do it. So about a week later, this is a long time ago, whenever Dan would come into the restaurants, which, but whenever he left for Chicago, he wasn't quite doing that much anymore. But so a long time ago, when he was still coming in and just kind of checking things out, he came in, and it was a Thursday. He came in Blue Springs, and we did not have a host. So he had to stand up there and wait. And then there was customers that had come in behind him that were standing there and waiting. So he just turned around and turned into the host and just started seating the customers. And my assistant manager called me and told me that, because I was at the Independence location. And I was like, oh my. So, we had a conversation later about how we were going to get the host back into the Blue Springs store.
I could just imagine. I would love to see that. And then I'm sure he said, Elise, why don't we have a host? These people, they're just standing there. Why didn't you have a way to sit them? I mean, he would, similar stuff here, why in the off season, we don't play baseball or utilize the stadium in the off season. So we would have to justify a way for revenue at times, for him. He's like, why are we doing that? Why is this person working today? And so sometimes you're like, well, Dan, just because there's a lot of pieces to this, and I don't think there's a better example than a host at a restaurant. That really hits home.
I just thought it was really funny because I had never seen him, and still that was the only time of all that I seen him actually come in and work. Actually come in and have to work.
Could you imagine the customers too of like this guy just turns around and
who is it?
4? All right, let's
This
go.
can't be happening. We're gonna have to all just sit down.
Like I'm trying to figure out what he sounded like, because Dan had that voice. Like sometimes it sounded very friendly, other times it's very stern. So I'm trying to figure out what voice Dan would have used to be a host and put a massive smile on.
And I assume they had no idea who Dan was. That they just
I
this man
assume so
seating them.
too. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dan. What do you do here? Nothing.
Yeah. We're all
Have a
gonna
seat.
sit down today.
And I also talked, earlier about his generosity. I mean, we've documented, what he's done for animal shelter and some different charities, just for people in general. He always if he couldn't come to a game, he wanted us to give away his seats somewhere. He would always give us gifts. We said food was his love language. I know he hosted. There was a couple of sports teams, high school teams, Benton and Lafayette, that he hosted at the Big Biscuit on their way down to state. He was so mad at me because I forgot to mention it. We had the opportunity to do it again this year. When they were going down to Springfield, and it just gave me a hard time for not letting them do that. But I also, when his team from Chicago, he bought us these. I got my background with Dan and Matt, and it's the Sister Jean bobblehead that he bought us in our office just because it was Chicago and he loves Sister Jean. I think, another time, and I've still got it, he actually gave it to Matt Tritton, a Blackhawks hat, when he went to Chicago. It's still up in our office. He would just get you, small things that, unexpected. And we weren't Blackhawks fans, or, I wasn't a big Chicago loyal, but he was just trying to be nice. Is there anything like that he did for you or any of your staff or a customer?
Yeah, every year we had a summer barbecue, and I think somehow he sponsored that. We did that through the Chamber of Commerce in Blue Springs. So he sponsored them, and then that allowed us to have a shelter at the Rotary Park behind the Zarda's Barbecue in Blue Springs. And we have a summer barbecue there every year, it's just amazing. I mean, he provided all the food for that. It wasn't never a limit on how many people could come. You wasn't just bring your husband, it was bring your whole entire family, anybody that needs to come and have a good time. We also did a Christmas party every year in December, and everybody that was a real, everybody really looked forward to these things. They really do. And then so we started the past couple years, 2 years before he got involved. I'll tell you one more funny little story. We did a Thanksgiving just with the people at work, and it wasn't like we were trying to hide anything from Dan, but we just decided a couple years ago.
I heard about this.
I thought, people had come to me and said, if we bring our own side, can we do something together? And there are some people, that are unfortunately don't get to do things with their family and stuff. So it was a great idea brought to my attention, and we all, so we did a couple years of pitching in and doing it ourselves. And when he found out about that, it was no. He was to buy the food. He couldn't believe I was doing this behind his back. And
why wasn't he invited? That was his big thing. Why wasn't I invited? They wouldn't invite me, and he would do the same thing to us. Aren't you guys going to invite us to your Thanksgiving? And so he brought that one up specifically. They didn't invite me.
Yeah. Yeah, but he took care of everything, and the one thing he told me, he said, you got to go to Costco and get these pumpkin pies. They are the best pumpkin pies ever. I can sit there and eat them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He was like, you have to buy 3 for everybody to eat. You have to buy 1 for yourself. Take it home. You have to get, and he was right though. It was the best pumpkin pie I ever had.
It's like Donut King all over again with his donuts.
But as far as the restaurant goes, he also he did a lot of sponsoring and catering. He did the Independence Police Foundation, the Independence School Foundation, the Chamber of Commerce in Independence, the Chamber of Commerce in Blue Springs, the Truman Medical Center. There's a lot of them that we did a lot of donation on the caterings.
he was big on, always supporting the police department, the fire department,
Oh
first
yeah.
responders, huge on that. Something else,
Well, and mentioning that, he did every 9/11 and Veterans Day. Every veteran ate for free. Every EMT, firefighter. I mean, everybody got a free meal that day, every year.
now we would also, speaking of Dan and some of his ideas, we suggested, it's July 4th. It's nothing's more patriotic than a Mustangs baseball game. And, you tune into ESPN, you see Joey Chestnut doing the hot dog eating contest. And so one year, speaking of, sometimes you don't tell Dan everything. And I think we had a hot dog eating contest and Dan arrived a little bit early and saw it and like just went berserk on me. And Dan, what's going on? And Dan was sometimes ultra, he had this stuff that just stuck with him. And so he would always talk about at the Santa Calagon days when they had a biscuit eating contest. And I don't know if you were a part of this, but I guess someone maybe almost choked on a biscuit. Are you aware of this?
I don't know that. No. But we
Yeah,
did cater to Santa Calagon days too. They ate our food too every year.
He would always reference never do a hot dog eating contest because they're going to choke because I guess someone choked on a biscuit outside at the biscuit eating contest. So I don't know how old that was. Elise, you and I crossed paths, I think originally because Dan would always, I say he asked for you, he would make you the big ask. And because it was Dan, you would just say yes. It was when the Chiefs beat, who he despised, the Chiefs beat the Texans in that miraculous comeback win. On social media, it blew up that there was this guy named Chuck, good luck Chuck, who left the stadium and like it just made news everywhere. And Dan was active on Twitter. He saw it, fell in love with it. And he said, what can we do? How can we get involved in this and make something nice out of this too? And so Dan said, Kai, get a hold of Chuck and pay for his tickets, and thank him for not going to the game. And I'm like, how am I supposed to get a hold of this Chuck guy? I have no idea. And I could probably still scroll through our Twitter DMs if Tim Hanna didn't get us kicked off that account. But so I found this Chuck and he agreed to meet us and we just gave him a check from Dan paying for his tickets. And then afterwards, we had dinner breakfast at lunch at the Big Biscuit. Right after that, he always wanted to treat us. And then again, in COVID, whenever he had us, film that video, it was just Dan's idea.
Yeah.
He just came up with something, wanted to pull it off. And he said, bring your family up. I'm going to feed them and we're going to film them bringing the food out to your car. And we're going to do this. And just, I know you
and
had
it
to go
was
through
really
a lot.
good. Like his idea was really good. It was a really good video.
He would just ask you to do stuff and you're like, Dan, I don't know how to do this or how to do this. The guy that filmed the video was my assistant GM at the time, and Tyler had no background in filming video. He would just ask us to do stuff. And so I don't know. That's kind of like Dan. He would just you'd find a way to say yes to Dan.
When he told me about that and that we were going to be doing that, he had so much faith. That's funny you say that because he said, these guys, they really know what they're doing. They do this all the time. They really know what they're doing.
Yeah, he would
like,
put
what if we
both
mess
people
up?
together.
Like, what if something happens and we mess up? And he's like, they'll fix it. It's fine. It's fine.
We and I, and he hated the Chiefs. He also hated the Royals, even though he had season tickets, which he would give away. I know I'm sure you used his seats. I used his seats.
Oh yeah.
He despised the Royals, but he also knew his fan base. And so I got a kick out when the Big Biscuit, were wearing Royals themed shirts, and I would always send those to him. And then, when the Royals were in the World Series, he was just so generous and wanted to do something nice. And he had us do an open tab at a local restaurant just to pay for people's drinks for like an hour. No reason.
That is
he just
really
wanted
nice.
He wanted to use baseball as a community. And so I think you kind of see that he's done that. And that carried over into the following season where he wanted the first drink free following a Mustangs baseball game every Friday. And so now I got to call these businesses and say, hey, we want to pay for the first drink free for fans. And what does that even look like? We had no idea. And somewhat complicated, but it was Dan asked you to do it, so you did it. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I went to I went to the game, the World Series game that was the last game that was here, and I at the last minute I got like standing room only tickets to go. It was like so last minute, and so when I told him about it that I was there and I got to see him win, and then they were going. He was like, "Why didn't you tell me you were going? I would have bought your ticket." And I'm like, "It's okay. It's fine. I had a great time. You know, it was worth every penny." And he paid me back for that ticket. Like, no, I'm buying your ticket. If I would have known you were going, I would have just bought your ticket. You should have just told me.
Yeah, he was. I
He's
mean, it
very
was,
kind, very generous.
he was always so kind to everybody. For me, this is something most people probably won't know other than me. I was looking for a house to move, and we were just at the time just looking for something. And, we were choosing between two different houses, and hey, we couldn't afford one, and why can't you afford that one? Well, the down payment was going to be huge. How much do you need, Dan? I don't know. And you tell him, and then he said, next day, you got the check for how much you need, or, just,
Yeah.
the Friday before
Yeah.
he passed, I talked to him for a half hour, and I was in Blue Springs for an event, and Dan says, what? I called him, and, it was like 2 o'clock. Why didn't you tell me you were in Blue Springs? I would have bought you lunch. I said, Dan, I just, he just always wanted to be so gracious to everybody. I know Matt, Chris, I'm sure, stories for you guys where he just kind of helped you out when he didn't have to, but he just wanted to.
We'd go to Kansas City for the MIAA tournament at Municipal, and every March I'd send him a text and say, hey, coming down, and we'd get lunch, and I'd be very specific, hey, you have to pay for it. But he would take the ticket every single time. The first one that they had coming out of COVID, I guess, would have been 2021, and he was very he's very safe. Wore a mask, took care of himself, tried to stay away from things to make sure that he wouldn't get infected or infect anybody else. But even that March, he's like, hey, we'll go to a place. He'll just kind of be a little set aside, and just because he wanted to catch up and see how the family was. And just always kind of thinking about other people and what he could do for them, and not really focusing on what's ailing him at that moment or what he's dealing with, So
he always said, and at least we had this group text message with him, because Dan liked to give everyone a hard time, that I was due to buy everyone a dinner.
You still are.
Which I will. But he wanted to go to the Capitol Grill, and how many steaks he was going to order that night, which I was all on board with. I mean, I wasn't going to buy him multiple steaks because I know he would have taken advantage of it, and I don't know if he would have let me paid. But just how he used food. In baseball to bond and to create fellowship with people, is pretty unique and remarkable. I think that's something, a legacy for him that, for me, I'll always remember, and I'm sure a lot of people will be affected because of Dan.
Yes. A lot of people at the Big Biscuit as well. He had a good friend in there. I think I can't remember his name for the life of me, but he played baseball, I think. And I can't remember, but he would come in and I would recognize him, and I would say, and then he would say, Elise, don't you call Dan and tell him I'm here, because I didn't come here for a free breakfast. I didn't come here don't you call and tell him I'm here. But if he found out somebody was there, he would call me. I know where they are. They're sitting right here. Do not let them pay for the food.
You had to tell Dan everything. Otherwise, if he found out something secondhand, he would lecture you for the next half hour.
Oh yeah.
And make you feel like the worst person in the world. So we all learned pretty quick.
Oh,
At least
yeah.
I know you've got a busy day, stuff ahead of you. I can't speak for Chris or Matt because they don't really do much. But is there anything, as we wrap this up, and I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing some of your experiences. Is there anything, you want to say about Dan that you haven't already, or just any
I
last
appreciate
thoughts?
you letting me come on here and say what I have said. And, Dan was just an amazing person to everybody that he came in contact with, especially the people that really, really knew him and that were really close to him. And he was just amazing. It was an honor to run these businesses with him. And it was a blessing to have him be my boss and be somebody that I could work with for that amount of time. He was very proud of me. He was very proud of himself, and he was very proud of the businesses, it was a very good accomplishment. It was very successful.
He would tell you when he was disappointed in you, and he would also tell you when he was proud of you. And so that was,
Yes.
he went both.
But it's very
he would go both
beneficial
ways.
that way too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so, not everyone could do that. Just to give you praise when you deserve praise, or but then also, give you the tough lessons, the tough love when you needed it.
Yeah.
And so, I would
Yeah.
have to say, just from the conversations we've had today to the I don't know how many others of people that he affected as well, that his legacy will absolutely continue on,
Oh
the
yeah.
future is bright,
Absolutely.
a much brighter place because of Dan. So, guys,
It is.
thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you so much.
Yes, we appreciate everybody here, and I know for us at Phil Welch, we've got some announcements. I won't put a timeline on it, but we will absolutely continue to honor and recognize Dan. And what Dan would want is to innovate and to go forward, and to keep doing what's best for the customer. And
Right.
you'll find that with all of us. So, Chris, I kind of took over what you were
That
saying
was
there,
what I
but
kind of hoped you would do.
Matt, is there anything you guys want to say as we wrap this up about Dan or anything?
It's just, man, he had such a good sense of humor, and you could have fun with him. But you're right, he would have those moments where he would kind of be a little more stern and let you know the lesson you needed to take away from something. So I've appreciated it, and I've got a lot of nuggets business wise that he kind of left that I'm trying to pick up and take on. It kind of starts with, like Elise said, just his customer first oriented mindset. And so, but then also just the fact that a guy you could talk to about baseball or life or anything in general. So gonna miss him, but again, looking forward to coming back out to a lot of St. Joseph Mustangs games and
A lot of
honoring
biscuits.
him at least in that way. Big Biscuit, and watching a few more White Sox games maybe next summer.
Chris, and I know I asked you, but I'm going to interrupt you. I go back to the first article that I found written about Dan, and he said the end quote was, we always are going to do what's best for the customer, and that's how we're going to operate. That was the first quote. And then that was one
Yep.
piece. And then the memorial video that you posted for him, he said, I told you what we were going to do, and that was the quote that you used from Dan back in 2009. I told you guys, this is what's going to happen. Elise, I told you this video was going to turn out well.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
he did it. He believed in it. He made the impossible possible, and just accomplished a lot. Even when you couldn't believe it, he pushed you to be further, a better person, a better career, pushed you to limits that you didn't know were possible. And so, like I said, his legacy, that last Tuesday, it's personally, I couldn't sleep the next day just thinking about all the different things, the stuff that my interactions with him and stuff that I wanted to hold on to and remember, and then just the outpouring of response messages that I received, all of last week was incredible. And I think Dan knows the effect that he had on people, but he would never take credit for any of that. But I mean, he had such a large effect and on so many different people. And so hopefully we did it right. Chris, wrap us up. Your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on quite a bit of it there as you were summarizing, because, like you said, you took over my job. But yeah, I learned a lot from Dan. And, you talked about him getting stern sometimes, but also his dry humor kind of went hand in hand. So you didn't know if he was serious, but then you'd find out he was serious. I'm like, oh, he wasn't joking. Got it. Good to know. Stuff like that, you would just kind of bounce ideas off of him, or more so, he'd bounce ideas off of you, and you would go do those ideas. But yeah, learned a lot from Dan, and just being able to talk to him last month about baseball and everything too, and him, why, even though he's in Chicago, still keeping track of everything. He wasn't owning the team anymore, but he was still watching every Mustangs game on the live stream. Just everything, just staying involved with what he helped build here in St. Joe too.
Elise, last question. Dan would ask us, he wanted us to do these podcasts. We had no idea why we would be on these podcasts. And then he would just ask us questions. He would want us to rank stuff, this or that. Like, he had these specific segments he and I would talk about, but that I would never share with anyone. And so we could catch them off guard. And I would always push Dan. Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do it. Because I know what their idea would be. And Dan and I would laugh about it. We loved having our dry sense of humor. But one question he would always ask us: cake or pie? So you got to tell us cake or pie and why.
Oh, I'd say cake because I'm more of like the chocolate instead of the fruit. But I know that Dan's a pie. He's a pie guy.
Banana cream pie. He's a banana cream pie. I
Just
think
with
there
the
was a
I mean,
hybrid.
every kind of pie. He loved to take the cobblers
Cheese
to the caterings, and then the pumpkin pie surprised me. You better get one for yourself.
is cheesecake a pie? Because I mean, it's like a cake, but it's pie. I mean, we would have these silly debates.
Oh,
Is
that's funny. I can imagine talking
the
about
ocean
that.
a soup? You know, because you think about it, you put your spoon, you could eat it right out. I mean, questions that
That's
we have to
funny.
get to. So, well, I appreciate you
That's
guys.
funny.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who's watched this, and you know, this one's for Dan. We'll talk to everybody, and we'll see everybody around.